How we doing today, neighbors? Ian with eTrailer here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster front anti-sway bar on our 2005 Workhorse chassis. Let's go ahead and get into a couple features of that and then the install. The main bar here is going to be made from a strong 4140 steel and feature this nice powder coated finish that's going to help keep any corrosion or dust or debris from building up here on the bar, thus transferring to all of the bushings. And while we're talking about the bushings, they all are a nice polyurethane bushing, so you're going to get a lot of longevity out of those compared to your rubber bushings that don't do as well when exposed to the elements. Now, Roadmaster does have an option for this particular sway bar kit that does not include the bracket shown here or this track bar. So if you wanted just the sway bar without the track bar, maybe you're going to be adding some airbags or something along with it, that would be something to consider. But with this one, we do get the track bar, which just mounts directly to our frame. This is going to help that rigidity in those turns and really reduce that body roll when it comes down to making the tight turns with such a large vehicle. To begin our installation, we'll need to identify the brackets, and Roadmaster's done a really good job of labeling all of those up for us. B595 is going to live on the driver's side, whereas the B426 is going to live on the passenger side. We're going to come to each side and remove the front U-bolt nuts. Those are 15/16. Now you will want to use a breaker bar initially just to get those loose before throwing the impact on there. These are going to be extremely rusted, so just take your time and work them loose and then throw the impact on. We'll remove the nut and the washer. And just to clarify, we are just doing the front side of the U-bolt pack there on our springs. So just take driver side front off and then passenger side. Now we're going to take the B426 that's going on the passenger side. We'll want the L for that bracket up towards the spring pack, and then we'll just take the washer and the nut that was already on there and we'll just get those started. We're going to leave those all loose for now. Then we're going to do the same thing with the B595 here on the driver's side, again leaving that hardware loose once we get it into place. Now we'll turn our focus to the B425 driver's side frame plate, and that's going to be using the bolt at the rearmost of our steering gearbox. So that 30mm bolt will need to be removed. Also, if you've got any lines on the inside of the frame, those will have to be shifted out of the way. We're going to be setting this up in that C channel oriented like this, and then the main hole, that oval hole, is going to be our hole that the 30mm bolt's going to run through. Using either a 1" and 3/16 socket or a 30mm or a combination of the two, we're going to remove that rearmost bolt that holds up the steering gearbox. We'll remove that flat washer and nut and pull that bolt on out. Take that bracket, slide it underneath those lines and push that into place, and then we'll get the large oval hole lined up with where we removed that 30mm bolt from. The kit's going to provide you with these 3/4 bolts and nylon lock washer, so we'll want to feed that through just like it was for the bolt originally holding the gearbox on, and then we'll get the nylon lock washer into place. Tighten that down just to make sure it's going to sit flush before we drill out the required 1/2 inch hole. In the top left of the driver's side bracket, you're going to see there's a 1/2 inch hole that will need to use a 1/2 inch drill bit to get an exact hole lined up with the frame there. So once we've got that at least bottomed out with the self-locking nut, we'll come back with that drill bit and get through our frame. Now we're going to take one of the 1/2 inch bolts, the flat washer with that and the nut, run that bolt through the face, applying the flat washer after, and then the nut. And then with a 19mm or 3/4 socket, you can get that snug down. Now we'll take our spacer and then one of the bracket clamps, get those lined up here. Then we're going to feed through 7/16 bolt with flat washer. So you want that spacer between the frame and your bracket that we've installed, and then you can take the nut and go ahead and get that at least finger tied on there, and do the same with the other bolt. Now we'll just come back through and snug all the hardware for that bracket down. It's a 5/8 and 11/16. We're going to follow the instruction manual as far as the torque spec. They are a little different, and there is a certain procedure of how they would prefer those tightened in what order, so just make sure you follow all of that. As for the passenger side, it's not going to be much different, except there is no bolt we'll have to remove, so you'll have to use the 3/4 bolt and nut out of the kit for the larger hole. Same situation with that 1/2 inch bolt. You will have to drill that one out and then run that through, of course, with your flat washer. One other thing I ran into over on this side is the hardware they give you for that 3/4 bolt up top. It seems like the shoulder may have been a little longer than was intended, because even with the washer they mention in the instructions, unfortunately we did have to find a shorter necked 3/4 bolt for that top corner. Now we can take the bar, and at the axle plates we're going to use a 5/8 bolt that's going to come from the inside going out through that bushing. And then best thing to do is just get them hung in there with the bolts on both sides, and then put the nuts on each side. And then on each side we'll go ahead and add the nut. Then we'll take a 15/16 wrench and socket and go ahead and torque that to the specification in the instruction manual. Now we're also going to hang up that passenger side all the same, and then we'll need to focus on our bushings and brackets that are going to live below that. They're going to send you this little cup of grease, so you can just take some of that and rub on the inside where that bar is going to live. And then there's going to be a slit in that bushing that we'll be able to slide that around the bar, and then also add our bracket. And just like we did with the other hardware, we'll get that snugged up first and then come back through with the torque wrench and follow that instruction manual for the torque specification. We'll take the channel of that bracket, go ahead and slide that over the bottom of the rail, and then you're going to have the plate with the 2 welded nuts on it. Do run the hardware through those before you try to put this up. The powder coating on that bracket is going to cause some binding as you're going up, so run those bolts through 2 or 3 times, and then through the bottom of the bracket we're going to come up to the bracket and thread those on. It'll be the one on the outside here, and then on the inside of this channel there's also the other. Before we tighten up the bracket hardware here, we do need to take the closed end of the rod, so not the end that has the adjustable side, but the non-adjustable side. We'll slide that into the bracket, bringing our bolt from the rear of the vehicle forward, and then we'll put the lock nut on top of that and just leave it loose for now. Now we need to take our threaded end and have that line up with our holes for the driver's side bracket, but before we do so, that passenger side bracket, since it's not tightened down, is going to move around and wobble on you, so just make sure you've got that level with the frame and all the way up against it, and then just snug down the hardware on those. That is going to be a 15/16 for those. To get our adjustments as far as the threaded rod at the end, what you can do is back the retaining nut off and then screw that either in or out, depending on what you need to get this hole to line up with the hole on the bracket. Feed that bolt from the back of the vehicle towards the front, add a flat washer on the outside of that, and then the nut. Now we're ready to come back through and tighten up our U-bolt nuts. So just use the manufacturer specification for those. That does not change even with our bracket on. So just make sure those are nice and torqued. And do that on both sides. Once you've got those done, then you can come to the hardware on your crossbar here to include tightening up this locking nut for the threaded part of the rod, and then make sure you tighten up your bracket that holds here on the passenger side frame rail as well. All of those are going to have the torque spec in that instruction manual. And that was a look at an installation of the Roadmaster front anti-sway bar with TruTrac rod kit on our 2005 Workhorse chassis. My name's Ian with eTrailer, and I appreciate you watching.